Tonight you will fall asleep listening to powerful Buddhist teachings. Get comfortable in your seat and let's go on this journey together.
What if I told you that the mind you've carried for 60, 70, or 80 years is not actually old at all? My dear friend, as you settle into this quiet moment, perhaps in your favorite chair, or lying in bed watching the shadows dance on the ceiling, I want you to know something profound. The ancient Buddhist masters had a secret about aging that changes everything we think we know about growing older. You see, there's a difference between the asterisk body asterisk that grows old and the asterisk mind asterisk that can remain forever young. Tonight, as we journey together through these gentle teachings, you'll discover why your most challenging years might actually be your most awakening ones. Have you ever noticed how a sunset becomes more beautiful to you now than it did when you were 30? How the laughter of grandchildren touches something deeper in your heart than any achievement ever did. That's not coincidence, my friend. That's wisdom blooming. But I know there are nights when you lie awake and the mind feels heavy with all it has seen, all it has lost, all it worries about. The body may ache in new places. The world may seem faster and stranger than before. And sometimes you might wonder if your best days are behind you. What if they're not? What if they're actually just beginning? Tonight, let me share with you the ancient story of Master Yunmen, who didn't even begin his greatest teachings until he was 73. Let me tell you about the wisdom that only comes with years of living, and how the Buddhist path reveals that what we call old age is actually the springtime of the soul. So breathe with me now. Asterisk, gentle pause. Asterisk, ... and let's discover together how to heal not just the tired mind, but to awaken the timeless spirit that has been waiting patiently within you all along. Do you remember when you first learned to garden? Maybe you were young, eager, pulling at weeds with impatience, frustrated when flowers didn't bloom exactly when you wanted them to. I think about this often when I meet people who tell me they feel too old to find peace, too set in their ways to change, too tired to begin again. They remind me of someone I once knew myself many years ago. Let me tell you about my own journey, because I think you'll recognize something in it. I came to Buddhism not as a young seeker, but as a man of 58, carrying decades of what I thought were mistakes, regrets, and missed opportunities. My hair was already gray, my back already stiff from years of sitting at a desk, worrying about everything except what truly mattered. I remember sitting in my first meditation class, surrounded by young people with their perfect posture and peaceful expressions. I felt like a withered tree trying to grow new leaves. The teacher, an elderly Vietnamese monk named Thichan Duc, noticed my discomfort. After class, he approached me with eyes that twinkled with something I couldn't quite name. "My friend," he said, "you think you are too old to learn wisdom. But tell me, when does a tree bear its sweetest fruit? When it is a sapling reaching toward the sky, or when its roots have grown deep and its branches have weathered many storms? Have you ever noticed how the oldest trees in the forest are often the most beautiful? Their bark is weathered, marked by years of rain and sun, but their presence is magnificent. They don't try to compete with the eager saplings. They simply are asterisk, deeply rooted, gracefully present, offering shade and shelter to all who need it. This is what the Buddha understood about the stages of life. In his teachings, he spoke of 4 seasons of human existence, and he called the final season the time of great harvest. Not the time of decline, but the time of harvest asterisk. Think about your own life for a moment. What have you harvested from all these years? I know. Your first thought might be about losses. The friends who are no longer here, the dreams that took different shapes, the body that doesn't move quite like it used to. But stay with me here, because there's something else, isn't there? There's a patience in you now that wasn't there at 20. When a young person is frustrated, they storm and rage. When you're frustrated, you might sigh and say, "This too shall pass." And you actually mean it, because you've seen it pass before, haven't you? There's a gentleness in you that comes only from having your heart broken and learning it can heal. You know now that harsh words often come from pain, not malice. You've learned to forgive more quickly, not because it's expected, but because carrying anger feels too heavy for bones that have carried enough already. And there's a clarity about what truly matters. The young worry about impressing strangers. You've learned to treasure quiet Sunday mornings. They chase after success. You've discovered that success often looks like an unexpected phone call from someone you love, or finding a perfect tomato in your garden. Master Yunmen, whom I mentioned earlier, used to tell his students, "The pine teaches us about endurance, the bamboo about flexibility, but the ancient oak teaches us about presence." It doesn't need to prove anything anymore. It simply stands, magnificent in its being. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about the sleepless nights, aren't you? When the mind churns with worries about health, about money, about children and grandchildren, about a world that seems to be spinning faster than your ability to understand it. Let me share with you what the Buddha called the gift of the worn path. He noticed that older students often struggled with what he called the mind's old stories, the repetitive thoughts that play like broken records in our heads. But he also noticed something beautiful. These students had walked enough paths to know that every road has an end. Every storm eventually clears. Every difficult chapter leads to a new one. The young mind is like a wild horse, he taught. It has energy, but no wisdom about where to run. The seasoned mind is like an old horse that knows the way home. It may move more slowly, but it rarely gets lost. This is why I believe your sleepless nights might actually be invitations, not to more worry, but to more wisdom. When you can't sleep, your mind isn't betraying you. It's trying to process, to understand, to find peace with all it has experienced. Tonight, instead of fighting those wakeful moments, what if we learn to embrace them as opportunities for gentle healing? What if we discovered that the old mind doesn't need to be fixed, but simply understood? As we continue this journey together, I want to tell you about a remarkable woman I met at a monastery in Japan. She was 84 years old and had just begun studying Zen Buddhism. When I asked her why she started so late in life, she smiled and said something that changed my understanding forever. Her name was Sachiko, and she had arrived at the monastery with a small suitcase and a walking stick worn smooth by years of faithful use. The younger monks whispered among themselves, wasn't she too old to begin the rigorous practice of Zen? Shouldn't someone of her age be taking it easy, rather than rising at 4 a.m. for morning meditation? But Master Tenzo, the head monk, welcomed her with deep bows. Later, I asked him why he showed such reverence for a beginning student. His answer was profound. She has something the young students don't have yet. She has learned to be comfortable with not knowing. Do you know what he meant by that? When we're young, we think we need to have all the answers. We're embarrassed by our questions, ashamed of our uncertainty. But somewhere along the path of living, we discover a strange and wonderful thing. The smartest people are often those who say, "I don't know," most freely. Sachiko told me her story as we sat in the temple garden, watching koi fish move lazily through the pond. For 60 years, she said, I was a teacher. I thought my job was to have answers. But after my husband died, after my children grew up and moved away, after I retired, I found myself surrounded by the biggest questions of all. Who am I when I'm not somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's teacher? What is the point of all this living and dying? What happens to love when the people we love are gone? She paused, feeding breadcrumbs to the fish. The young monks come here to find enlightenment. I came here to find peace with mystery. Isn't that beautiful? Have you felt this too? This shift from needing to know everything to being curious about anything? When you were raising children or building careers, there was so much you had to figure out, so many problems to solve. But now, perhaps there's space for different kinds of questions. Not, how do I fix this? But what is this teaching me? Not, how do I succeed? But how do I find meaning? Not, what should I do? But who am I becoming? Sachiko became one of the most beloved students at the monastery, not despite her age, but because of it. She brought something precious to the community, the wisdom of having lived fully, loved deeply, and lost gracefully. I watched her in morning meditation. While younger students fidgeted, fighting with their restless thoughts, Sachiko sat with the stillness of someone who had learned that thoughts, like weather, simply come and go. She didn't judge her wandering mind or strive for perfect concentration. She sat like a grandmother watching children play, attentive but relaxed, present but not demanding. The young ones are trying so hard to empty their minds, she told me one evening. But my mind is already full of so much living. Instead of emptying it, I'm learning to be friends with everything that's in there. My friend, listen to this carefully, because it might change how you think about your own mind. Sachiko was describing what Buddhist teachers call inclusive awareness, the practice of making peace with all the contents of consciousness, rather than fighting to create some perfect, empty state. Your mind holds decades of memories, doesn't it? Some sweet, some painful, some confusing. The traditional approach might tell you to let go of it all, to somehow become blank and serene. But what if there's another way? What if your memories are not burdens to release, but treasures to hold gently? What if your experiences, even the difficult ones, are not obstacles to peace, but pathways to compassion? I think of how you might remember holding your babies, and how that memory can still flood your heart with tenderness decades later. Or how you might recall your parents' voices, and even though they're gone, hearing those voices in your memory brings both sadness and love. These aren't distractions from spiritual practice. They are asterisk spiritual practice. Sachiko taught me that the seasoned mind doesn't need to become empty. It needs to become spacious. There's a difference. Empty suggests getting rid of things. Spacious suggests having room for everything. Let me tell you what happened during Sachiko's 3rd month at the monastery. There was a young monk named Kenji who was struggling terribly with meditation. He would sit on his cushion, face scrunched in concentration, fighting with his thoughts like they were enemies to defeat. The harder he tried, the more agitated he became. One morning, Sachiko approached him after meditation. "Kenji-san," she said gently, "may I share something with you?" She told him about her grandson, a boy of 6 who had trouble falling asleep. "The more I told him to stop thinking and go to sleep," she said, "the more awake he became. But one night, instead of fighting his active mind, I asked him to tell me about all his thoughts." "What are you thinking about?" I asked. He told me about the ant he saw that morning, the airplane he heard outside, the way his blanket felt soft against his cheek. As he shared each thought, I said, "Yes, I see. What else?" Soon, his thoughts became gentler. And then, he was asleep. Kenji listened, puzzled. But how does this apply to meditation? Sachiko smiled. Instead of fighting your thoughts, what if you greeted them like a grandmother? Oh, hello, worry about the future. Hello, memory of yesterday's conversation. Hello, sound of birds outside. Not pushing them away, not pulling them closer, just ... hello. Do you see the wisdom in this? Sachiko had learned something that only comes with years of living, the art of gentle non-resistance. When you've raised children, you know that the more you fight a tantrum, the bigger it gets. When you've been married for decades, you know that some arguments dissolve better with listening than with logic. When you've lost people you love, you know that grief heals better when you let it move through you rather than around you. This is the gift of the seasoned mind. It knows how to be with difficulty without being defeated by it. But Sachiko's greatest teaching was still to come. One evening, about 6 months into her stay, she asked to speak with the entire community. She was leaving the monastery, she announced, not because she had failed, but because she had found what she came for. I came here thinking I needed to learn how to meditate, how to find enlightenment, she said. But I discovered that I've been meditating my whole life without knowing it. Every time I rocked a crying baby until we both found peace. Every time I sat with my dying mother, just breathing with her. Every time I tended my garden, patient with seeds that took their own time to grow. Every time I forgave my husband for the same small fault, again and again, until forgiveness became as natural as breathing. She continued, the young monks are learning to be present. But I realized I'd been practicing presence for decades. When you've lived long enough, you learn that this moment, right now, is all we ever really have. Not because some teacher told you so, but because you've seen how quickly moments can disappear. The room was completely silent. Even the master had tears in his eyes. I thought I was too old to find wisdom, Sachiko said. But I discovered that wisdom had been finding me, year by year, experience by experience. My wrinkled hands know things that smooth hands cannot. My silver hair has earned its color. My slow walk has learned when to pause. As we move deeper into our journey together tonight, I want you to consider Sachiko's revelation. What if you're not behind on some spiritual path, but exactly where you need to be? What if the years haven't worn you down, but built you up into someone capable of a peace that younger hearts are still learning to imagine? But I know that believing this isn't always easy. There are those nights when the body aches and the mind won't quiet, when the world feels too fast and you feel too slow. Let me tell you about another teacher, one who learned to transform the very experience of suffering into a doorway to freedom. His name was Thomas, and he had been a successful engineer for 40 years before retirement. When I met him, he was 72 and hadn't slept well in months. He came to our Buddhist community center, not seeking enlightenment, but simply seeking rest. I lie awake thinking about everything, he told me during our first conversation. The mistakes I made raising my kids, the opportunities I missed, the friends I've lost. My mind is like a library where all the books have fallen off the shelves, and I spend all night trying to put them back in order. Does this sound familiar to you? Those long hours when sleep eludes you and thoughts seem to multiply in the darkness? Thomas was experiencing what we call in Buddhism the night visitor, not some supernatural presence, but the way unresolved thoughts and feelings visit us most intensely when the world is quiet and we can no longer distract ourselves from them. Many people Thomas's age had told him to just stop thinking about it, or let go of the past, or try some sleeping pills. But these well-meaning suggestions only made him feel more broken, more abnormal for struggling with something that seemed to come so naturally to others. I shared with Thomas an ancient Buddhist teaching about the second arrow. The Buddha explained that when we experience pain, physical or emotional, that's the first arrow. We can't always avoid first arrows. They're part of being human. But then we often shoot ourselves with the second arrow, the judgment, shame, and resistance we feel about experiencing the first arrow. So lying awake with a busy mind is the first arrow, I explained to Thomas. But telling yourself you're broken for lying awake, feeling guilty about being tired the next day, comparing yourself to people who sleep easily, that's the second arrow. And often, the second arrow causes more suffering than the first. Thomas looked at me with the expression of someone who had been carrying a heavy load and suddenly realized someone else could see the weight of it. So I'm not failing at sleep? He asked. I'm just sleeping differently right now. This simple reframe was the beginning of Thomas's healing journey. Instead of fighting his wakefulness, he began to approach it with curiosity. Instead of lying in bed feeling frustrated, he would get up, make a cup of herbal tea, and sit quietly with whatever was visiting his mind that night. He started keeping what he called a night visitor journal. When memories or worries came, instead of pushing them away or getting lost in them, he would write them down. But not just the facts. He wrote about what these thoughts were trying to teach him. Let me read you something Thomas wrote in his journal, because it's so beautiful and might speak to your own night visitors. Tonight the visitor was regret about harsh words I spoke to my son 15 years ago during his divorce. Instead of spinning in circles about this, I asked the regret what it wanted to teach me. It showed me how much I love my son, how I was afraid for him and didn't know how to express that fear except through criticism. It taught me that my heart was always in the right place, even when my words weren't. And it reminded me that it's never too late to call someone you love and simply say, "I'm proud of you." Do you see what happened? Thomas didn't solve his regret or make it disappear. He transformed his relationship with it. Instead of being tortured by the memory, he let it teach him about love, about fear, about the continuing possibility of connection. This is what the Buddhist masters call turning poison into medicine. Not by pretending painful things aren't painful, but by discovering what gifts they might be carrying in their sharp hands. Thomas's sleep didn't magically become perfect, but something more important happened. His wakefulness became purposeful. He began to see those quiet night hours not as stolen time, but as sacred time, moments when the busy world couldn't intrude, when he could sit with his life and really see it, really understand it. About 3 months into this practice, Thomas had what he called his most important insomnia. He had been lying awake thinking about his late wife, Margaret, who had died 2 years earlier. Usually, these thoughts brought a mixture of love and terrible loneliness that left him feeling exhausted and sad. But this night was different. Instead of fighting the grief or getting lost in it, he sat up in bed and spoke to Margaret as if she were there. "Hello, my love," he said to the darkness. "I miss you. Tell me what you want me to know tonight." What happened next surprised him completely. Instead of feeling more alone, he felt accompanied. Memories came, but they were warm memories. Margaret laughing at his terrible jokes, the way she hummed while doing dishes, how she always knew exactly what to say when he was worried about work. It was as if she was visiting me, Thomas told me later, not to make me sad, but to remind me how much love we shared, how that love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It just changes form. This is one of the most profound teachings about aging and loss that I've encountered in all my years of practice. Thomas discovered that his late-night thoughts about Margaret weren't signs of unhealthy attachment or inability to move on. They were his heart's way of continuing to love her, of processing and integrating decades of shared life. He began having what he called conversations with memory. When thoughts of his deceased parents would visit, instead of feeling guilty for not calling them more often when they were alive, he would ask them what they were proud of about his life now. When memories of his younger self would appear, instead of criticizing past decisions, he would offer that younger self the compassion he needed at the time. The night visitor was no longer an intruder, but a teacher. Now, my friend, I want you to think about your own night visitors. What thoughts come to you in the quiet hours? What memories play and replay? What worries surface when the world grows still? What if these aren't signs that your mind is broken or that you're doing something wrong? What if they're invitations to deeper wisdom, opportunities to heal old wounds, chances to have conversations with your life that the busy daylight hours don't allow? Thomas taught me that the seasoned mind doesn't need perfect sleep as much as it needs peaceful wakefulness. There's a difference between lying awake in torment and lying awake in gentle communion with your own experience. One of my favorite moments with Thomas came about 6 months after we first met. He was telling me about a particularly restless night when thoughts about his mortality had been visiting, not unusual for someone his age, but always challenging. "I used to lie there terrified, thinking about dying," he said. "But last night, I asked death what it wanted to teach me about living. And you know what came to me? Death reminded me that every day I wake up is a gift I didn't earn and don't deserve, but get to have anyway. It reminded me that the temporary nature of life makes every moment more precious, not less." He paused, smiling. "I actually thanked death for the reminder, and then I went to sleep like a baby." This is the transformation that's possible when we stop fighting our experience and start learning from it. The old mind isn't something to fix or overcome. It's something to befriend, to listen to learn from. But perhaps you're wondering how to make this shift from resistance to acceptance, from fighting your thoughts to dancing with them. Let me share with you the most practical and beautiful technique I've ever learned, taught to me by a master who understood that wisdom isn't about having fewer thoughts, but about having a different relationship with the thoughts we have. Master Suzuki was 91 years old when I first met him, and his mind was as clear as mountain water. Students would often ask him how he maintained such mental clarity at his age, expecting to hear about special diets, supplements, or complex meditation techniques. His answer always surprised them. "I practice mental aikido." Mental aikido? Most people had never heard of such a thing. Aikido, as you may know, is a martial art, but instead of fighting force with force, it redirects the opponent's energy. When someone pushes, you don't push back. You step aside and guide their momentum in a new direction. When someone pulls, you don't resist. You move with them until their own force brings them to balance. Master Suzuki had discovered that the same principle could be applied to thoughts and emotions. Instead of fighting difficult mental states, he learned to redirect them. "When I was younger," he told me, "I tried to have a peaceful mind by getting rid of all disturbing thoughts. This is like trying to have a quiet house by shouting at every sound. The shouting makes more noise than the original disturbance." He taught me that the aging mind faces unique challenges that require this kind of gentle redirection. Let me share some of his teachings, because they might transform how you relate to your own mental experience. First, there's what he called the worry redirect. You know how worry works, don't you? Your mind fixates on some future problem. What if your health declines? What if you run out of money? What if your children don't visit enough? The natural tendency is to either feed the worry with more what-ifs or fight it with forced optimism. Mental Aikido suggests a third option. Redirect worry's energy toward preparation and love. Here's how it works. When you notice worry arising, instead of saying "stop worrying," you say, "Thank you, worry, for showing me what I care about. Now let's use this energy constructively." Worried about your health? Let that concern guide you toward taking good care of yourself today. Maybe a gentle walk, a nutritious meal, scheduling that doctor's appointment you've been postponing. Worried about your children? Let that love energy guide you toward connection. Maybe writing them a letter, sending a thoughtful text, or simply holding them in your heart with warmth rather than anxiety. Worried about finances? Let that concern guide you toward wise planning, or, if you've already planned as much as you can, toward cultivating gratitude for what you have. Do you see the difference? Instead of being trapped in worry loops, you're using worry's energy as fuel for loving action. The martial artist doesn't eliminate the opponent's force, they transform it. Master Suzuki taught me about the memory redirect as well. This is particularly relevant for those of us carrying decades of experiences, some joyful and some painful. Painful memories often visit not to torture us, but to heal. They're like injured friends knocking on our door. They need attention, but the right kind of attention. Here's an example. Let's say a memory surfaces of a time you lost your temper with someone you loved, and now they're no longer alive to receive your apology. The natural reaction might be to push the memory away. I can't change it now, or sink into it with self-blame. Mental aikido suggests redirecting that energy. This memory is showing me how much I value kindness and how sorry I am that I fell short of my own values. Let me use this recognition to be extra patient with someone today, to call someone I love and tell them how important they are to me, to forgive myself the way I would forgive a dear friend. The memory becomes not a source of suffering, but a teacher of compassion. I learned the most powerful version of mental aikido from Master Suzuki during my own darkest period. I was going through what I can only describe as a crisis of faith, not in Buddhism, but in life itself. I was 67, facing health challenges, watching friends pass away, feeling like the world was changing too quickly for me to keep up. I came to him in despair. "Master," I said, "I feel so old, so tired, so irrelevant. The young people seem to have all the energy and purpose. What's the point of continuing?" He looked at me with those ancient, twinkling eyes. "Ah," he said, "despair has come to visit you. This is a very powerful visitor. What does despair want to teach you?" I was frustrated. "I don't want despair to teach me anything. I want it to go away." He smiled. "But despair is like a strong wind. If you stand rigid against it, it will knock you down. If you try to ignore it, it will howl louder. But if you let it move through you, it will carry away what no longer serves you and leave behind what is truly important." He taught me to practice what he called despair aikido. Instead of fighting the feeling of being old and irrelevant, I would redirect that energy toward discovering what truly mattered at this stage of life. "Ask yourself," he suggested, "what would feel most meaningful right now? Not what should feel meaningful, not what felt meaningful when you were 30, but what calls to your heart today in this season of your life." What emerged surprised me. I found myself drawn not to grand achievements or recognition, but to simple acts of presence. Listening deeply to people who needed to be heard, offering comfort to those who were struggling, sharing stories that might help others feel less alone. The feeling of being irrelevant transformed into a recognition that relevance isn't about keeping up with the latest trends or competing with younger energy. It's about offering the gifts that only come with having lived fully: perspective, patience, the ability to find beauty in ordinary moments, a hard-won knowledge that most problems eventually resolve themselves. Master Suzuki called this the great transformation of later life. He believed that what we call aging is actually the soul, preparing itself for its highest contribution. The body may slow down, but the spirit can soar in ways it never could when it was busy with the urgent demands of earning, achieving, and building. Let me share one more technique Master Suzuki taught me, because it might be the most practical for those quiet moments when your mind feels restless or unsettled. He called it the gentle redirect of attention. Instead of trying to force your mind to be blank or peaceful, you practice guiding it toward beauty. When you notice your thoughts spinning with worry or regret, you gently redirect them. Mind, what is beautiful in this moment? Maybe it's the sound of rain on the roof. Maybe it's the memory of your child's laughter. Maybe it's the softness of your pillow or the warmth of your blanket. Mind, what am I grateful for right now? Maybe it's that your heart is still beating. Maybe it's that someone loves you. Maybe it's that you have a roof over your head and food in your kitchen. Mind, what love is present in my life? Maybe it's the love you feel for family. Maybe it's the love you have for a pet. Maybe it's the love you're discovering for yourself in this season of life. This isn't about denying difficulties or pretending everything is perfect. It's about training the mind to notice that even in times of challenge, beauty, gratitude, and love are still present. They're like stars that are always shining, even when clouds make them temporarily invisible. Master Suzuki lived to be 98, and until his final weeks, his mind remained sharp and peaceful. Not because he never had difficult thoughts or challenging emotions, but because he had learned the art of dancing with them rather than fighting them. A young mind is like a warrior, he used to say. It wants to conquer every enemy. The wise mind is like a skilled dancer. It moves with whatever music is playing, finding grace in every rhythm. As we near the end of our journey together tonight, I want to leave you with the most important teaching of all. Not a technique or practice, but a truth about who you are and what this stage of life really means. It's a truth that can change, not just how you sleep, but how you wake up to each new day. There's a monastery in the mountains of Tibet where the monks have a tradition. Every evening, as the sun begins to set, they gather on the western terrace to watch. But they don't watch in silence. Instead, they offer gratitude, not just for the day that's ending, but for the beauty that's only possible because the sun is setting. You see, sunset colors, those magnificent golds and roses and purples that take your breath away, they only happen because light is traveling through more atmosphere, because the sun is at a different angle, because something is ending. The most beautiful light comes not at midday when the sun is strongest, but at twilight when it appears to be leaving. The master at this monastery once told me, people weep for the setting sun, forgetting that its beauty is the gift it gives precisely because it is setting. If the sun stayed at noon forever, we would never see these colors. My dear friend, as you rest in this quiet moment, I want you to consider that you might be living in your sunset years, and that this isn't a tragedy to mourn, but a masterpiece to celebrate. When I was young, I thought wisdom meant having all the answers. Now I know it means being comfortable with all the questions. When I was young, I thought strength meant never needing help. Now, I know it means having the courage to accept love when it's offered. When I was young, I thought success meant accumulating achievements. Now I know it means appreciating what's already here. These shifts in understanding, they don't happen in spite of aging. They happen because of aging. They are the sunset colors of a life well lived. Do you remember when you first held your child or grandchild or any small life in your arms? Remember that overwhelming tenderness, that fierce protectiveness, that sense of being connected to something infinitely precious? That feeling, that's not gone. It's actually grown larger. It now extends not just to the small lives you can hold, but to all life, all fragile beings trying to make their way in this difficult and beautiful world. Do you remember the first time you truly understood that your parents were mortal, vulnerable humans rather than the invincible figures of your childhood? Remember how that realization was heartbreaking and enlightening at the same time? How it made you love them differently, more tenderly. That capacity for tender love, that's what you bring to the world now. You see the humanity in everyone because you've learned to see it in yourself. The Buddhist teachings speak of something called the wisdom of impermanence. It sounds like a sad teaching, doesn't it? But it's actually the most liberating truth you can discover. When you truly understand that everything is temporary, your pain, your joy, your worries, your life itself, you stop clinging so tightly to controlling it all. You start appreciating it while it's here. You begin to live with what the masters call the open hand, holding life gently rather than grasping it desperately. This is why your sleepless nights might actually be sacred time. In those quiet hours, when the world is still and your mind is open, you're practicing the art of being present with whatever arises. You're learning what the Buddha called the patient endurance of a wise heart. I think about all the people I've known who discovered their greatest peace not in their youth, when everything seemed possible, but in their later years, when they finally understood what was truly important. They stopped trying to be everything to everyone and learned to be authentically themselves. They stopped racing toward some imaginary finish line and started savoring the journey itself. There's a beautiful Japanese concept called mono no aware. It's often translated as the pathos of things, but it really means the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things and the gentle sadness and beauty that comes with that awareness. It's the feeling you have when you see cherry blossoms falling knowing they're more beautiful because they don't last forever. Your life has reached the season of mano no aware. Everything feels more precious because you understand its temporary nature. The phone call from a friend feels sweeter because you know how rare good friends become. The taste of your morning coffee seems richer because you've learned not to rush through it. The sight of children playing fills you with joy because you remember when that energy lived in your own body, and you can appreciate it now without needing to possess it. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. The Buddhist masters teach that the ideal time to begin serious spiritual practice is not in youth, when the ego is strong and the distractions are many, but in what they call the autumn of life, when the heart has been broken open by loss and love, when the illusions of control have been gently stripped away, when the soul is finally ready to discover what lies beneath all the roles and achievements and identities we've carried. You are not late to wisdom. You are right on time. Your aching joints are teaching you to move with gentleness and intention. Your slower pace is teaching you to notice things you used to rush past. Your need for more rest is teaching you to honor your body's rhythms rather than fighting them. Your changing relationships are teaching you about the difference between loneliness and solitude, between being needed and being loved. And those memories that visit you in the night, the ones that make you smile and the ones that make you weep, they're not random tortures or meaningless nostalgia. They're your soul's way of integrating a lifetime of experience into wisdom. They're helping you understand the story of your life, not as a series of disconnected events, but as a meaningful journey with themes and patterns and profound teachings. When you remember your mistakes with compassion rather than judgment, you're practicing forgiveness at the deepest level. When you remember your joys with gratitude rather than longing, you're acknowledging that happiness was never about permanent circumstances, but about the capacity to appreciate temporary moments. When you remember the people you've lost with love rather than only sorrow, you're discovering that death ends relationships, but not love itself. This is what I want you to understand as you drift towards sleep tonight, my friend. You are not a diminished version of your younger self. You are not a broken down machine that needs fixing. You are not behind on some spiritual path or late to some enlightenment party. You are a human being who has lived fully enough to develop wisdom, loved deeply enough to understand loss, struggled honestly enough to recognize grace when it appears. You are a sunset painting the sky with colors that only come with time, with experience, with the beautiful complexity of having been here long enough to really see. Your wrinkles are maps of laughter and concern. Your silver hair is a crown earned through years of caring. Your slower movements are a dance performed to rhythms too subtle for younger hearts to hear. Your need for quiet is not withdrawal from life, but a deeper engagement with what matters most. So tonight, when you close your eyes, let yourself feel proud of all the years you've lived, all the love you've given, all the challenges you've faced, all the growth you've experienced. Let yourself appreciate the marvel of a heart that's still beating, a mind that's still wondering, a soul that's still learning. If sleep comes easily, receive it as a gift. If sleep dances just beyond your reach, receive the wakefulness as an opportunity to practice presence, to sit peacefully with your own life, to offer gentleness to whatever arises in consciousness. You don't need to fix anything or figure anything out or become anyone other than who you are. You just need to be here, breathing softly, resting in the extraordinary ordinariness of this moment. The Buddha taught that enlightenment isn't about transcending human experience, but about fully embracing it with an open heart. You've been practicing this your entire life without knowing it. Every time you've comforted a crying child, you practiced compassion. Every time you found beauty in an ordinary day, you practiced mindfulness. Every time you've forgiven someone who hurt you, you practiced love. Every time you've gotten up after falling down, you practiced resilience. This is why the masters bow deeply to older students, not because age automatically brings wisdom, but because age provides the opportunities for wisdom that younger years cannot offer. The losses that teach us what matters, the failures that teach us humility, the successes that teach us impermanence, the love that teaches us that connection is the deepest truth. As we complete our journey together tonight, I want to leave you with this truth. You are exactly where you need to be, exactly who you need to be, exactly when you need to be it. Your life is not a problem to be solved, but a gift to be appreciated. Your aging is not a defeat, but a victory. The victory of having lived long enough to understand what couldn't be understood at 20 or 40 or even 60. Rest now, knowing that you are held by the same loving awareness that holds the stars in their courses, the seasons in their cycles, the breath in your body. Rest knowing that your very existence is a miracle that doesn't depend on your accomplishments or your failures, your past or your future, your strengths or your limitations. Rest knowing that tomorrow is a new day, full of possibilities for kindness, for beauty, for connection, for the quiet joy that comes from being fully present to whatever life offers. And if you wake in the night, remember that you're not alone. You're surrounded by the love of everyone who has ever cared for you, everyone you have ever cared for, and the infinite compassion that breathes through all beings. Sleep well, dear friend. Dream peacefully. And when you wake, may you greet the new day with the wisdom of someone who has learned that every sunrise is a gift, every breath is a blessing, and every moment of being alive is a sacred opportunity to love this temporary, beautiful existence. May you rest in the deepest peace,